It is strange how the fear of rejection can sneak into moments that seem harmless. You can be standing in a room full of people, pretending everything is fine, while a tiny voice inside your mind whispers that you do not quite belong. You feel it when you want to say something, but your chest tightens, as if your words might crumble the second they leave your mouth. And what is even more unsettling is how quickly your brain can turn a neutral moment into a personal threat. Someone looks away too fast, and that voice says they did not like you. A message gets left on read, and the voice says you said something wrong. A silence lasts a little too long, and suddenly it feels like proof that you are not wanted. Before we continue, a quick note. Many of you watch our videos but haven't subscribed yet, so please subscribe to our channel Restwise and join our growing community. We'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's amazing to see how connected we all are. If you enjoy relaxing with philosophy, psychology, and science while drifting into sleep, give this video a like and stay with us on the journey. Now, let's get back to the video. This fear hits so hard because it targets something primal. Humans are social creatures. For most of our existence, belonging has been a matter of survival. So the brain is wired to treat rejection like danger. It sends out stress signals, floods your system with cortisol, and makes your thoughts run ahead of reality. That is why even small things can feel overwhelming. Your mind is not being dramatic. It is doing what it thinks it must to keep you safe. But it does not always get the difference between social risk and actual danger. The wild part is how the fear of rejection teaches us to reject ourselves before anyone else has the chance. You do not ask the question. You do not apply for the job. You do not tell someone how you feel, not because you are incapable, but because some part of you believes it is easier to avoid the possibility of being unwanted. It is like your brain tries to negotiate with the world by shrinking your desires. If I want less, maybe it hurts less. If I speak less, maybe I embarrass myself less. If I exist a little quieter, maybe nothing bad happens. And yet, that strategy almost always backfires. The opportunities you avoid drift away. The connections you long for never form. You end up living inside a smaller version of your own life. Many people do not even realize they are doing this. They say they are being realistic or cautious or independent. But underneath those words is often a fear that no one will choose them if they show up fully. There is a psychological pattern called rejection sensitivity that explains why certain moments trigger stronger reactions. When someone has been rejected or criticized often, especially growing up, the brain becomes hyper-alert to any sign of withdrawal. It starts scanning for even the smallest cues. A shift in tone, a slight delay, a lack of enthusiasm. None of these things automatically mean rejection, but a sensitive mind interprets them as personal. It becomes a self-protective reflex that kicks in long before logic has a chance to speak. Think about how this shows up in daily life. You might replay conversations in your head, trying to figure out the exact moment you might have said something wrong. You might overthink every message before sending it. You might assume people are irritated with you when they are simply tired. The fear twists normal interactions into puzzles you must solve, even though there is nothing to solve. But here is the hidden truth that most people never realize. Rejection is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of compatibility, timing, preference, or circumstance. Yet the fear convinces you that if someone does not choose you, it means something is wrong with you. That is why it feels so heavy. You are not just afraid of hearing no, you are afraid that no means you are not enough. And that belief shapes your behavior more than the rejection itself ever could. Once you internalize that idea, you start editing yourself in real time. You say less. You soften your opinions. You hide the parts of you that feel too much. You trade authenticity for safety. But the cost of that safety is that people can only connect with the version of you that you have watered down. What makes this fear so powerful is that it does not always look like fear. It often looks like perfectionism or independence or wanting to handle everything alone. You may tell yourself you do not need help or support or reassurance. But sometimes that is just another way of saying you do not want to risk being let down. The real turning point comes when you notice how much of your life is shaped not by what you want, but by what you are trying to avoid. Because once you see that, you can start asking a much more honest question. What would I do if I was not afraid of being unwanted? Fear of abandonment. There is a certain kind of fear that does not just sit in your mind. It lives in your chest. It shows up as a pressure you cannot explain, a restlessness that keeps you alert even when nothing is happening. That is the fear of abandonment. It is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, heavy, and always scanning. It keeps you bracing for the moment someone you care about might walk away, even when they show no sign of leaving, and it creates a tension inside you that feels like you must constantly prove you are worth staying for. What makes this fear so gripping is that it often begins long before you understand what it is. Maybe it was a parent who was there one day and unpredictable the next. Maybe it was a friend who drifted away without warning. Maybe it was someone you loved who pulled back just when you thought you could trust them. Whatever the moment was, the brain remembered it. Human beings are wired to track safety through closeness. So when closeness suddenly breaks, the nervous system learns a survival lesson. Do not get too comfortable. Do not trust too easily. Do not let someone become too important unless you are ready for the pain of losing them. From that point on, the fear of abandonment does something tricky. It creates patterns that you do not even recognize as fear. You might find yourself holding on too tightly to someone, checking for signs of distance before they even appear. Or you might do the opposite and pull away the second someone gets close, trying to leave before they can leave you. It can also look like people-pleasing, constantly adapting yourself to what you think others want, so they will not have a reason to disappear. Or it can look like emotional self-sufficiency, telling yourself you do not need anyone so that no one can hurt you. These behaviors seem different, but they all come from the same place. A belief that connection is fragile and must be managed carefully. A belief that if you are not perfect, patient, entertaining, or accommodating, someone might slip away. And the most exhausting part is that your mind is not trying to make life harder. It thinks it is protecting you. There is a psychological mechanism called attachment conditioning where the brain forms expectations about relationships based on early interactions. When care is dependable, the brain learns that closeness is safe. When care is inconsistent or unpredictable, the brain learns that closeness comes with risk. And once that wiring is in place, it influences everything. It affects how you interpret silence, how you react to conflict, how you handle uncertainty, and even how you experience intimacy. For example, a person with a fear of abandonment might feel anxious when someone replies a little later than usual. The brain jumps straight to worst-case scenarios, not because the person did anything wrong, but because the nervous system has learned to treat emotional distance as danger. The same thing happens in arguments. A simple disagreement can feel like the edge of a breakup. A short pause in conversation can feel like the start of someone pulling away. Your brain connects present moments to past wounds without asking your permission. And here is the painful irony. The fear of abandonment can push people to act in ways that accidentally create the very outcomes they fear. Clinging tightly can overwhelm others. Avoiding closeness confuses partners and friends. Testing commitment to see who stays can damage trust. Emotional shutdowns can create distance, even when the intention was self-protection. The fear tries to prevent abandonment, yet it can end up shaping relationships around anxiety instead of connection. But the part that rarely gets talked about is what this fear does internally. It shapes how you see yourself. You start to believe you must earn love. You start to think you are not enough unless you are constantly proving your value. You become hyper-aware of your flaws, as if they are reasons someone might decide you are too difficult or too much. And in moments when someone does pull back for reasons that have nothing to do with you, your mind takes it personally anyway. The fear tells you this is proof that you were right to worry. Yet there is a hidden truth beneath all of this. Most abandonment fears are not really about the current relationship at all. They are echoes of moments when you were too young or too unprepared to understand why someone left or withdrew. The emotional brain does not track time the way the rational brain does. If something once hurt deeply, the emotional brain reacts as if it could happen again at any moment, even if you are now surrounded by people who care for you. One of the most powerful shifts comes when you begin to separate the past from the present. When you start to see that the fear is a memory, not a prophecy. When you recognize that relationships today are not destined to repeat the injuries of yesterday. That shift does not magically erase the fear, but it helps you understand it, and understanding reduces its control. In the end, the fear of abandonment is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that something important once mattered to you, and you learn to protect yourself the only way you knew how. The real turning point is when you begin to realize that safety in relationships is not created through control or constant vigilance. It is created through honesty, boundaries, and choosing people who show you with consistency that they are not going anywhere. Fear of being judged. There is a moment almost everyone knows, though no one ever talks about it. That split second right before you do something simple, like walk into a room or speak up in a group, when your brain suddenly kicks into overdrive and starts predicting what everyone else might think of you. It comes out of nowhere. 1 second you are fine, and the next you feel your stomach tighten as if a spotlight just turned on and every tiny detail about you is being examined. That is the fear of being judged. It is not loud, it is not dramatic. It is subtle, steady, and surprisingly powerful. What makes this fear so intense is that it targets something deeply human. For thousands of years, your survival depended on the approval of your group. If you were rejected, criticized, or pushed out, it was not just embarrassing. It was dangerous. So your brain learned to track social evaluation as if it were life or death. Even today, in a world where you no longer need a tribe to physically survive, the mind still reacts to judgment like a threat. Your heart speeds up, your senses sharpen, you replay your actions. You try to control how others see you even when you know you cannot. The fear of being judged does something interesting. It makes you imagine an audience that may not even exist. You walk into a gym and suddenly feel like every person is analyzing how you move. You speak in a meeting and you worry someone is secretly noting every mistake. You post something online and immediately wonder who might be rolling their eyes. You start living inside a world of imagined critics, and the more you feed that world, the more real it feels. There is a psychological mechanism called metaperception, which describes how people try to guess what others think of them. The problem is that humans are notoriously inaccurate at this. Studies consistently show that people believe others are judging them far more harshly than they actually are. But your mind does not care about accuracy. It cares about protection, so it prepares for the worst. It scans for danger in every expression, every pause, every moment of silence. And because this fear feels so convincing, you start treating it like truth. This fear often shows up in subtle ways. You hold back your opinions because you worry someone will think they are silly. You choose safer clothes, safer hobbies, safer conversations, all because you want to blend in just enough to avoid criticism. You avoid trying new things because you do not want to look inexperienced. You apologize too quickly because you fear someone might see you as rude. You shrink yourself by a few degrees, thinking it will keep you safe, even though it slowly dims the parts of you that feel alive. What makes the fear of being judged particularly exhausting is that it puts you in a constant state of self-monitoring. You become your own critic before anyone else gets the chance. You rehearse conversations in your head. You analyze your facial expressions. You replay moments from hours ago, trying to figure out whether you sounded strange or awkward or too much. You end up carrying the weight of judgments that no one actually placed on you. Deep down, this fear is not really about other people. It is about the standards you secretly hold for yourself. People who fear being judged often fear confirming their own insecurities. If you believe you are not smart enough, then every raised eyebrow feels like proof. If you believe you are awkward, then every silence feels like validation. The external world becomes a mirror for the things you already worry about internally. There is also something called the spotlight illusion, where people overestimate how much attention they attract. The truth is that most individuals are too focused on their own worries to obsess over yours. They are thinking about their own insecurities, their own flaws, their own fear of being judged. The very people you think are evaluating you are likely afraid of being evaluated themselves. But the fear keeps you from seeing that. The fear of being judged can shape behavior in ways that seem logical on the surface, but actually limit your life. You might pursue only the goals that guarantee approval rather than the ones that truly matter to you. You may avoid creativity because it feels vulnerable. You might stay quiet in moments where your voice is needed. You might even stay in relationships or environments that drain you because change feels too public and too open to criticism. And yet, there is a strange paradox hidden inside this fear. The more you try to prevent judgment, the more controlled and stiff you become. And the more controlled you feel, the more self-conscious you get. It becomes a loop. You fear judgment, so you tighten up. You tighten up, so you feel less like yourself. And the less like yourself you feel, the more you assume others are noticing your discomfort. The real turning point comes when you realize something fundamental. People do not judge you nearly as much as your mind says they do. And even when they do judge, it is rarely about who you are. It is about their preferences, their assumptions, their own insecurities. Their judgment is a reflection of their world, not a verdict on your worth. When you start to understand that, the fear begins to loosen. You start to feel a bit lighter. You speak a little more freely. You take small risks. You show up as yourself, not because you no longer care what anyone thinks, but because you finally understand that judgment is inevitable and it does not define you. And once that awareness settles in, you stop living for imaginary critics and start living for the person you are becoming. Fear of failure. There is a moment you probably know too well. You get an idea, or an opportunity shows up, or someone encourages you to try something new, and for a split second you feel excited. You picture how it could go right. You feel that spark. But almost immediately, something else shows up. A heaviness, a tightening in your stomach, a voice that says, "Slow down, be careful, what if this goes wrong?" That shift right there is the fear of failure. It steps in like a protective guard, insisting it is only trying to keep you safe, even though it ends up keeping you stuck. What makes the fear of failure so powerful is that it never appears as just fear. It disguises itself as practicality or responsibility or timing. You tell yourself now is not the right moment, or you need more preparation, or you should wait until the conditions are perfect. But underneath those explanations is often the same worry. If I try and it does not work, then what does that say about me? The fear of failure targets your sense of identity. When something matters to you, the stakes rise because the outcome feels personal. You are not just afraid of a project falling apart. You are afraid it might confirm the doubts you already carry inside. Doubts about whether you are capable, talented, disciplined, smart enough, or deserving. Failure becomes more than an event. It becomes a verdict. And once you see it that way, avoiding it feels like self-protection. There is a psychological mechanism that explains part of this. Humans are wired for pattern recognition, and your brain uses past experiences to predict future outcomes. If you once failed at something and felt ashamed or judged or unsupported, your brain remembers the emotional sting, not just the practical lesson. The next time a similar challenge appears, the brain triggers a warning, trying to save you from repeating that pain. It is not trying to sabotage you. It is trying to prevent another emotional injury. But protection and possibility often pull in opposite directions. This fear shows up in your behavior in subtle ways. You procrastinate not because you are lazy, but because avoiding the task lets you avoid the emotional risk. You overprepare because perfection feels safer than vulnerability. You set your goals lower than your potential because it feels less embarrassing to miss a small target than a big one. You talk yourself out of ideas that once felt exciting because imagining success feels easier than attempting it. And sometimes the fear takes a different form. Instead of shrinking your ambitions, it convinces you to take on so much that you can always blame exhaustion or overwhelm if something fails. If you are too busy, then any failure can be explained away. It is a clever shield, even if it slowly burns you out. The fear of failure does something else that is rarely acknowledged. It attaches your worth to your performance. When things go well, you feel proud and capable. But when things go wrong, it hits deeper than disappointment. It feels like a personal flaw. That emotional swing is exhausting, and it trains you to avoid the possibility of the low by never fully reaching for the high. But here is the part most people overlook. Failure itself is rarely as painful as the anticipation of failure. The fear is in the imagining. The brain fills in the unknown with worst-case scenarios and emotional exaggerations. You imagine humiliation when in reality most people are too focused on their own lives to judge yours. You imagine permanent setbacks when most failures are temporary. You imagine being exposed or ridiculed when in truth, trying something difficult earns more respect than playing it safe. There is a fascinating insight from cognitive psychology called the illusion of finality. People often believe one failure defines the entire future, as if a single moment can lock in the rest of their outcomes. But human lives are far more flexible than that. Most achievements are built on a string of attempts that did not work. Most people you admire failed repeatedly, often privately, long before you ever heard their names. The difference was not that they had no fear. It was that they learned to move with fear instead of around it. The fear of failure can also create a strange sense of paralysis. You imagine every version of what could go wrong, and the weight of those imagined futures becomes so heavy that doing nothing feels easier. But doing nothing is not emotional neutral ground. Doing nothing creates its own form of disappointment. It might feel safer in the moment, but over time it becomes its own kind of failure, one that grows quietly through regret. What many people do not see is that the fear of failure is often a sign of potential, not weakness. You only fear failing at things that matter. You do not worry about failing at things that do not reflect your values or identity. The fear shows you where your heart is invested. It shows you what you care about deeply. There comes a turning point when you realize that the fear is not warning you about danger. It is warning you about growth. It is showing you the edge of your comfort zone, the place where your future self is waiting. Fear is loud in the doorway of potential. The key is not to eliminate it, because no one does. The key is to stop letting it make decisions for you. And once you notice that, you start to see failure differently. Not as a verdict, not as an identity, not as an ending, but as a step. Sometimes a painful one, sometimes an unexpected one, but always a step forward. And when you stop treating failure like a fatal moment, you create space to actually live the life you want instead of the life your fear is negotiating for. Fear of success and its consequences. There is a strange moment that almost no one expects. You are working toward something you have wanted for years, pushing through obstacles, imagining the day things finally click. Then suddenly, just as the finish line starts to come into view, your excitement shifts into something heavier. Instead of feeling thrilled, you feel tense. Instead of imagining the rewards, you start imagining the consequences. And a part of you, sometimes a quiet part, and sometimes a loud one, starts to whisper that maybe it would be easier if none of this worked out after all. That is the fear of success. Most people think it sounds ridiculous until they realize they have felt it too. The fear of success sneaks into your mind like a shadow behind your ambition. It does not question your ability. It questions the aftermath. It makes you wonder if the life you are reaching for might demand more from you than you can handle. That maybe success is not just an achievement, but a responsibility. More eyes on you, more expectations, more opportunities to disappoint people. It is not the winning that scares you. It is everything that winning might create. This fear often hides under logical excuses. You tell yourself you are tired. You tell yourself the timing is not right. You start slowing down without realizing you are doing it. You delay the next step. You become strangely hesitant about doors you once begged to have open. What you are really afraid of is the idea that life might change in ways you cannot control. And even positive change can feel like a threat to the nervous system, especially if you grew up associating attention or achievement with pressure. There is a psychological mechanism called cost anticipation. The brain makes predictions about the price of getting what you want. If you believe success will lead to isolation, judgment, jealousy, or increased demands, the brain sees success as a danger rather than a reward. It creates hesitation because it is trying to protect you from imagined pain. The strange part is that the fear can appear even when you logically know the benefits outweigh the drawbacks. Think about how this shows up. You get a promotion opportunity and suddenly wonder if you can maintain it. You start a project that begins to gain traction and you feel yourself pulling back. You meet someone who genuinely likes you, and instead of relaxing into it, you start thinking about what might eventually go wrong. You begin to fear the idea of raising your standards because you are worried that once you elevate your life, there is a long way to fall if anything slips. The fear of success can also come from old beliefs that success requires sacrifice. Maybe you saw someone work themselves to exhaustion to maintain their achievements. Maybe you learned that attention brings criticism. Maybe you were taught that people who succeed become targets. If the people around you in the past reacted negatively to your accomplishments or treated success as something that must be earned through suffering, then your brain learned to associate achievement with stress rather than joy. But there is another layer that often goes unnoticed. Success forces you to face new versions of yourself. It challenges your identity. When you rise, you must shed parts of who you were. Old habits, old relationships, old ways of thinking. And that can feel like loss, even if the growth is good for you. You might fear that success will change you in ways that distance you from people you care about. You might fear outgrowing your circle or being misunderstood. Humans are wired for belonging, so anything that threatens your social anchor can trigger a deep emotional resistance. This fear also appears in perfectionists. When success raises the bar, the pressure increases. People begin to expect more from you. You begin to expect more from yourself. Instead of celebrating what you have achieved, you start worrying about maintaining it. The higher you climb, the more visible you become, and visibility can feel vulnerable. You may worry that one mistake will undo everything you have built. That pressure can make success feel like a trap rather than a triumph. There is also the fear of losing freedom. Success often brings structure, responsibility, and new commitments. It might bring financial obligations, leadership roles, or public expectations. Some people fear that success will steal their spontaneity or the comfort of being unseen. They fear losing the ability to live quietly, experiment freely, or make mistakes without consequences. The most hidden element of the fear of success is the belief that you are not ready, even when you are, even when you have worked for it, even when you have earned it. You imagine a future version of yourself who is more disciplined, more confident, more prepared, and you wait for that version to arrive before you step into your opportunity. But that version never comes. Success does not require perfect readiness. It requires willingness. And here is the part most people do not understand. The fear of success is often a sign that you are closer than ever to a breakthrough. The brain reacts strongly to things that matter. Your fear is not telling you to stop. It is telling you that you are standing on the edge of a life that will stretch you. A life that will require a new you. a life that might feel uncomfortably real, because it asks you to step into the potential you have been trying to pretend you do not see. The turning point comes when you realize that success will always carry consequences, but so does holding back. Staying small has consequences. Playing safe has consequences. Letting your dreams shrink to match your fears also has consequences. The fear is not asking you to avoid success. It is asking you to understand that growth requires movement, even when that movement feels unfamiliar. And the moment you accept that, the fear loses its power, not because it disappears, but because you stop treating it like a warning and start treating it like confirmation that you are stepping into something meaningful. And that is where real change begins. Fear of being truly seen as vulnerability. There is a certain kind of fear that does not show up when you walk into a crowded room or when you introduce yourself to someone new. It shows up later, in the quiet moments when connections start to deepen and walls start to loosen. It is the fear that someone might look past the version of you that you carefully present to the world and actually see the real you. The parts you keep tucked away, the stories you do not tell, the emotions you try to manage on your own. That is the fear of being truly seen, and it is one of the most powerful forms of vulnerability. This fear does not come from a lack of confidence. It comes from experience. At some point, you learned that letting people get too close comes with risk. Maybe you opened up to someone who did not handle your honesty with care. Maybe you shared something personal and it was misunderstood. Maybe you were taught to be strong, to keep yourself together, to show only the polished version of who you are. Whatever the reason, you learned that being truly seen feels like standing without armor, and the thought of that can be terrifying. The fear of being seen often appears not as fear, but as a natural preference for privacy, independence, or emotional control. You tell yourself you simply do not want to burden anyone. You say you are fine. You say you can handle everything on your own. You convince yourself that staying guarded is maturity, when sometimes it is actually self-protection. You want closeness, but you fear the cost of it. You want understanding, but you fear the exposure it requires. One reason this fear shows up so strongly is because humans carry two conflicting needs: the need for connection and the need for safety. Being seen satisfies the first but threatens the second. Connection requires openness, honesty, and a willingness to let someone witness your emotions. But safety wants control, predictability, and distance from things that could hurt. When these needs collide, you end up stuck in an emotional tug-of-war. You want someone to know the real you, yet you brace against the possibility they might not accept what they find. There is also a psychological mechanism at play. The human mind creates what researchers call a self-protector narrative. It is a story built around past experiences of hurt, rejection, or criticism. This story tells you that letting people in is dangerous. It reminds you of moments when your vulnerability was not met with compassion. And because the brain prioritizes survival, it highlights those memories more strongly than memories of connection. That bias makes opening up feel like walking toward potential danger, even when the person in front of you has given you no reason to fear them. The fear of being seen appears in subtle ways. You share pieces of yourself, but leave out the parts that matter. You deflect compliments because they feel too intimate. You crack jokes to lighten moments that feel too real. You steer conversations away from anything personal. You keep your deeper emotions hidden behind distractions, achievements, or a carefully curated image. These behaviors are not random. They are strategies, ways of remaining present without becoming exposed. And yet, this fear also shows up on the opposite side. Some people overshare without actually revealing anything meaningful. They talk about everything except the truth they are afraid to face. They fill the space with noise so no one can sense what is unspoken. It looks open, but it is another form of protection. The fear of being truly seen often begins with the belief that the parts of you that are messy or imperfect must be hidden. That if someone knew your insecurities, your fears, your past mistakes, they would think differently of you. The fear tells you that people only like the filtered version of you, the strong version of you, the composed version of you. So you become skilled at presenting that version. You become good at keeping certain emotions quiet. You become good at editing yourself in real time. But here is the thing most people never learn until much later. Being seen does not hurt because others cannot handle your truth. It hurts because you fear that your truth confirms the doubts you already hold about yourself. Doubts about being enough. Doubts about being lovable. Doubts about being worthy of compassion. The fear is not that someone will reject you. The fear is that they will see what you already criticize in yourself. There is another hidden consequence. When you fear being seen, you also prevent yourself from receiving the kind of connection you quietly long for. You want relationships that feel deep, supportive, and genuine, but those relationships require openness. You want people to understand you, but they cannot understand what you refuse to show. You want to feel known, but knowing requires vulnerability. The turning point comes when you realize that vulnerability is not exposure. It is selection. You choose who gets to see the deeper parts of you. You choose when and how much. Vulnerability is not recklessness. It is trust, built slowly and intentionally. And the moment someone proves they can handle your truth with care, your nervous system learns that being seen is not always dangerous. You begin to understand that being real does not push the right people away. It draws them closer. It creates relationships that feel solid instead of scripted. It creates intimacy that is rooted in honesty, not performance. And in that space, you discover something powerful. The parts of you that you feared would make you unlovable are often the very parts that make you human. The very parts that help others feel safe enough to open up to. And once that realization settles in, the fear of being seen loses its authority. Not because the fear disappears, but because your courage grows stronger than your instinct to hide. Fear of not being enough. There is a strange moment that hits people without warning. You could be getting ready for something simple, like speaking up in a group or starting a new project, and suddenly there is this quiet pull in your chest. It says you are not enough, not smart enough, not talented enough, not attractive enough, not worthy enough. It shows up so fast that you think it is truth instead of fear. And that feeling shapes decisions more than anyone wants to admit. What makes this fear so powerful is that it feels personal, but it usually starts somewhere far in the past. Maybe you grew up trying to earn approval that never came consistently. Maybe you were compared to someone who always seemed better. Or maybe you learned early on that love or praise only arrived when you performed perfectly. The mind absorbs these moments deeply. It starts building an inner scoreboard where your value depends on achievement or appearance or usefulness. And once that scoreboard exists, it never stops updating itself. Every mistake feels like proof. Every success feels temporary. You can see this fear in the smallest behaviors. The way you rehearse conversations in your head before speaking. The way you downplay your accomplishments to avoid sounding confident. The way you blame yourself for things you cannot control. Or the way you assume others have everything figured out while you are still trying to appear collected. Even simple tasks take more energy because the fear wraps itself around everything, telling you that any misstep will expose you. Psychologists call this conditional worth. When acceptance feels earned instead of given, your brain learns to treat self-value like a performance. You begin chasing validation the way someone chases oxygen. It becomes a survival habit. You succeed and feel relief, not joy. The relief fades, and the fear returns with a new demand to prove yourself again. It becomes a loop that never gives you room to rest. This fear also affects relationships in ways you might not notice. Sometimes you give too much because you believe you must earn your place in someone's life. You become the dependable one, the fixer, the listener, hoping that if you provide enough value, you will stay needed. Other times, you pull away from people who get too close because you worry they will eventually see your insecurities and decide they want something more. Both patterns come from the same belief that who you are is not sufficient on your own. And then there is comparison. You look at others and assume they are more confident, more talented, more deserving. You forget that they are comparing themselves too. People rarely show their doubts. They hide them behind success or humor or confidence. So you end up comparing your private fears to someone else's public image. And of course you come out feeling less. One of the sad effects of this fear is how it shrinks your world. Dreams that once felt exciting begin to feel unrealistic. You convince yourself that wanting something too big is dangerous because failure would confirm the fear you already carry. So you settle. You quiet your ambition. You choose paths that feel safe rather than paths that feel right. And each time you do, the fear quietly wins. But here is the thing that hides beneath all of this. The fear of not being enough does not reflect your actual worth. It reflects the story you learned when you were younger, a story written by circumstances that had nothing to do with your potential. The voice telling you that you fall short is not truth. It is habit. It is repetition. It is memory trying to protect you by preparing you for disappointment. The real shift happens when you stop treating that voice like a fact. When you notice it trying to shrink you and decide to move anyway. When you realize that every person you admire has wrestled with the same fear. What separates people who grow from those who stay stuck is not confidence. It is the willingness to act even when the fear whispers that they are not ready. Enough is not something you earn by proving yourself. Enough is something you strengthen by showing up, by trying, by learning, by being honest about what you want. And once you understand that, the fear loses its grip. It becomes something you recognize, not something you obey. And that is where you begin to reclaim the power this fear once took from you. Fear of losing control. There is a moment that almost everyone knows, even if they try not to talk about it. It is that sudden feeling that something in your life is slipping out of your hands. It might be a situation you cannot fix, an emotion you cannot push down, a reaction you cannot predict. And instantly, your mind tightens, your chest tightens. You tell yourself to calm down, to stay composed, to get a grip. But underneath that effort is the fear that you are losing control. This fear is powerful because it touches a very basic human instinct. People want to feel like they are steering their own lives. They want to believe they can manage their thoughts, their emotions, and their circumstances. So when things begin to move outside of those boundaries, the brain treats it like a threat. It activates the same survival systems that were meant to protect you from danger. Heart rate rises, thinking becomes sharper, but also more frantic, and a quiet sense of panic begins to build. Not because of what is happening, but because you cannot stop it from happening. For many people, this fear begins early. Maybe you grew up in a place where things felt unpredictable, where you had to stay alert and prepared. Maybe you learned that being emotionally steady made you safer. Or maybe you were praised for being the responsible one, the strong one, the person who had everything together. If that becomes part of your identity, then losing control feels like losing yourself. The fear shows up in different ways depending on the person. Some people micromanage everything around them, trying to prevent problems before they appear. Some try to control themselves so intensely that they struggle to relax or express what they feel. Others avoid situations that might create uncertainty, choosing safety over possibility. And some people swing in the opposite direction, holding on so tightly that the pressure itself becomes overwhelming. There is also a biological layer to this. The brain loves patterns because patterns feel predictable. Predictability feels safe. Losing control breaks the pattern. It introduces the unknown, and the unknown is where the brain imagines everything that could go wrong. This is why the fear rarely matches the reality. The situation might be small, but the reaction feels huge because your mind is not reacting to the situation. It is reacting to the possibility of chaos. This fear becomes especially strong around emotions. When people say they are afraid of losing control, they often mean they are afraid of feeling something too deeply. Anger, sadness, disappointment, desire, grief. These emotions can feel bigger than your capacity to handle them. You worry that if you let them in fully, you will fall apart and never come back together. So you try to be calm. You try to be logical. You try to be stable. But underneath that effort is an unspoken worry that your emotions might show themselves in a way you cannot manage. This fear affects relationships more than people recognize. You might avoid difficult conversations because they could get messy. You might stay guarded even with people you trust because vulnerability feels unpredictable. You might hold yourself back from deep connection because you worry you will lose emotional balance if things get too close. And the sad thing is that the more you try to protect yourself by controlling everything, the more disconnected and alone you can begin to feel. But here is the part that often gets overlooked. The fear of losing control is not a sign that you are weak or unstable. It is a sign that you have spent a long time trying to carry everything on your own. It means you value stability. It means you want to feel safe. The fear reveals how deeply you care about managing yourself and your life well. The real shift happens when you stop fighting the fear and begin understanding it. Control is not all or nothing. You do not have to hold everything tightly to stay stable. You do not have to predict every outcome to be prepared. Letting go a little does not mean falling apart. It simply means trusting that you can handle moments that are unfamiliar or uncomfortable. And once you realize that, the fear begins to soften. You stop gripping life so hard. You allow yourself to breathe. You learn that strength is not about controlling every detail. Strength is about staying grounded even when things move in ways you did not expect. Fear of uncertainty. There is a specific kind of fear that does not need danger to exist. It appears the moment life stops giving you clear answers. When you do not know what is coming next, when you cannot predict what someone will do, when you cannot see the outcome of a choice you are about to make, that uncomfortable space in between the known and the unknown can feel almost unbearable. Your mind starts racing, searching for something solid to hold on to, but everything feels like shifting sand. That is the fear of uncertainty, and it shapes far more of your behavior than you might realize. The strange thing about uncertainty is that it triggers the same survival systems the body uses when it senses real physical threat. The brain hates gaps in information. When it does not know what will happen, it begins filling in the blank space with imagined outcomes. And the imagined outcomes are rarely positive. They tend to be worst-case scenarios because the brain believes that preparing you for the worst keeps you safe. So even if nothing bad is happening, your body reacts like something is already going wrong. This fear becomes even stronger when you have lived through unpredictable situations in the past. If you grew up in a place where you had to guess what mood someone would be in, or if you lived with sudden changes, sudden losses, or sudden shifts in stability, your mind learns to stay on alert. You start scanning for hints, clues, signs. You try to anticipate every possibility because uncertainty feels like danger, even when it is not. The habit of preparing for the worst becomes a form of self-protection. You can see this fear in everyday choices. You hesitate before making decisions because you want the guarantee that you will not regret them. You replay conversations in your mind because you want to be sure nothing was misunderstood. You delay taking risks because the thought of not knowing the outcome feels heavier than the possibility of succeeding. Even moments that should be exciting become stressful because excitement is wrapped in unpredictability. This fear also affects your ability to enjoy the present. When your mind is constantly forecasting what might happen, you never fully land in what is happening right now. You might be spending time with someone you care about, but part of you is thinking about what could go wrong in the future. You might start a new relationship, but fear of uncertainty makes you analyze it instead of simply experiencing it. You might want to try something new, but the unknown feels too unsafe to step into. So you stay still, even when something inside you wants to move. One of the most difficult parts of this fear is the illusion of control it creates. The mind tells you that if you worry enough, prepare enough, or predict enough, you can prevent bad things from happening. But no amount of thinking can eliminate uncertainty. Life will always have unknowns. The more you try to control what cannot be controlled, the more anxious and exhausted you become. This is why people who fear uncertainty often feel mentally tired even on calm days. Their minds never stop working. But here is the important truth. Uncertainty is not the enemy. Your relationship with it is. The discomfort you feel is not a sign that something bad will happen. It is a sign that you are stepping into a space your brain does not have a pattern for yet. And the human brain loves patterns. It feels safe when things are familiar. So when you face something new, the fear rises not because the future is dangerous, but because it is unfamiliar. The shift begins when you stop trying to eliminate uncertainty and start learning to stand inside it without spiraling. When you realize that some of the best things in your life came from moments you could not predict. When you understand that certainty is often an illusion, and uncertainty is where growth, connection, and possibility actually live. It is not about pretending the unknown feels comfortable. It is about trusting that you can handle whatever waits on the other side of it. And once you start building that trust, the fear loses its power. You stop needing every answer before you take a step. You stop filling the gaps with worst-case scenarios. You allow yourself to move forward even without a perfect map. And that is when uncertainty becomes less of a threat and more of a doorway you are finally brave enough to walk through. Fear of change. There is a moment everyone experiences, but few admit out loud. It is that pause you feel right before something in your life is about to shift. It might be a new job, a different routine, an unexpected opportunity, or a situation you never planned for. On the outside, you might say it is exciting or interesting, but inside there is this tightening, a quiet resistance, a voice that says stay where you are, even if where you are is not where you want to be. That feeling is the fear of change, and it has a stronger grip on human behavior than almost any other fear. What makes this fear so powerful is that change demands two things at the exact same time. It asks you to leave what is familiar, and it asks you to step into something you cannot fully predict. And the mind does not like that combination. The brain is built to value safety and stability, and nothing feels safer than what you already know, even when what you know is uncomfortable or limiting. Familiar pain often feels safer than unfamiliar possibility. That is the strange psychology behind change. You can see this fear show up in ways that seem harmless at first. You might stay in a routine that drains you because it feels predictable. You might resist learning something new because the early stages feel awkward. You might stay connected to people who no longer support the person you are becoming because the history feels easier than the unknown. And even when life gives you signs that it is time to evolve, something inside you hesitates. Not because you doubt the direction, but because you fear the transition. There is a biological element to this. The brain uses mental shortcuts to conserve energy. It builds habits, beliefs, and behaviors into automatic patterns. When change arrives, it threatens those patterns. It forces the brain to work harder, to rethink, to adapt. That extra effort feels like danger, so the body responds with stress, hesitation, and a desire to retreat. This is why even positive changes can feel emotionally overwhelming. Psychologists refer to this as the familiarity bias. The mind instinctively prefers what it has experienced before because it can predict it. And predictability feels safe, even if the reality is not. So when change approaches, the mind searches for every possible reason to delay it. What if it does not work out? What if you are not ready? What if people judge you? What if everything becomes worse instead of better? The fear tries to talk you into staying exactly where you are. This fear also influences your sense of identity. When life changes, you change with it. You shed old versions of yourself. You adopt new roles, new responsibilities, new expectations. And part of you wonders whether you can carry the weight of the new version of yourself. Growth always requires letting go, and letting go is uncomfortable because it means losing a part of who you were. Even if you do not love that old version, it feels familiar. You know how to be them. Learning how to be the next version of yourself is a different story. The fear of change also affects relationships. Sometimes you avoid speaking up because you worry it will change the dynamic. Sometimes you stay silent about what you want because you fear that wanting more will shift the balance. Sometimes you stay close to people who belong to an older chapter of your life because moving on feels like betrayal. But the truth is that change does not destroy relationships. It reveals which ones can grow with you. The turning point comes when you recognize that fear of change is not a warning. It is a reflex. It is the mind trying to protect you from uncertainty, not trying to guide you toward what is right. The discomfort you feel is not a sign that the change is wrong. It is a sign that the change matters. And once you understand that, something powerful happens. You stop seeing change as a threat and start seeing it as an invitation. You learn to step forward even while feeling unsure. You learn to trust that you can adapt, that you can grow, that you can handle the unfamiliar. And in that space, the fear begins to loosen its hold, and you finally make room for the life waiting beyond the version of you that fear tried to protect. Fear of loneliness. There is a feeling most people avoid even thinking about, let alone admitting. It is that heavy quiet that settles in when the noise fades and you realize you are sitting with only yourself. Some people fill their schedules to escape it. Others cling to relationships that no longer feel right. And some stay connected to people who drain them, simply because the emptiness of being alone feels scarier than the discomfort of staying. That is the fear of loneliness, and it shapes choices in ways most people never acknowledge. This fear is powerful because loneliness is not just about being without company. It is about being without connection. Humans are wired to belong. The brain reads isolation as danger. In ancient environments, separation meant vulnerability, and that instinct still lives inside us. So when you sense even the possibility of being alone, your body reacts. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts start circling. You imagine yourself drifting away from everyone who matters. The fear comes before the reality. What makes this fear tricky is that loneliness does not always look lonely from the outside. You can be surrounded by people and still feel isolated. You can be in a relationship and still feel unseen. You can have a large circle and still feel like none of them truly know you. The fear of loneliness pushes people to stay connected in ways that look healthy but feel empty. You smile, you engage, you show up, but inside there is a quiet worry that if you stopped trying, everything would fall apart. This fear often begins with early experiences of emotional absence. Maybe you grew up in a place where your feelings were not heard. Maybe the people around you were physically present but emotionally unavailable. Or maybe you learned that the world around you was inconsistent, and you had to hold yourself together in silence. The mind remembers these patterns. It learns that being alone is unsafe, that solitude is a threat, that the moment you lose connection, you lose stability. You can see this fear in the way people chase distraction. They scroll endlessly, not because they are interested, but because the silence feels too sharp. They say yes to invitations they do not enjoy because declining feels like drifting away. They jump quickly into relationships because even a flawed connection feels better than none. They tolerate treatment they do not deserve because the thought of ending things feels like stepping into a void. And yet, loneliness itself is not always the problem. The real fear is what loneliness represents. It represents the belief that if you are left alone with yourself, you will not be enough. That without someone else beside you, your life loses shape or meaning. That without external affirmation, you might face parts of yourself you have been avoiding. Loneliness forces reflection, and reflection can feel uncomfortable when you have spent years staying busy to avoid it. There is another layer to this fear that is rarely talked about. Being alone removes the noise that usually shields you from your inner world. Without that noise, old wounds can surface. Doubts can grow louder. Memories can feel closer. The fear of loneliness is often the fear of facing these things unfiltered. So the mind does whatever it can to keep you connected, even if those connections are not healthy or fulfilling. The goal is not happiness. The goal is avoiding emptiness. But here is the truth people often overlook. Loneliness loses its power when you stop treating it like a verdict. It is not proof that you are unworthy. It is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a natural emotional state that becomes overwhelming only when you fear it. When you stop running from it, it stops chasing you. The real shift begins when you allow yourself to sit in solitude without assuming it means abandonment. When you learn how to enjoy your own presence, even a little. When you realize that connections built out of fear cannot nourish you. And when you start choosing relationships based on genuine belonging rather than desperation for company. Because once you make that shift, something unexpected happens. Loneliness no longer dictates your choices. You stop clinging to people who do not value you. You stop accepting half-hearted connections. You stop fearing the quiet. You begin to understand that being alone and being lonely are not the same thing. One is a circumstance, the other is a belief. And when the belief changes, the fear finally loosens its grip, giving you room to form connections that feel real, balanced, and worthy of the person you are becoming. Fear of intimacy. There is a moment in every close relationship where things shift, not because of drama or conflict, but because someone is getting too close in a way that feels uncomfortably real. They start to notice your patterns. They see the parts of you that are not polished. They ask questions that touch the layers you usually keep hidden. And instead of leaning in, something inside you pulls back. It might be subtle, like creating distance with humor, or getting busy all of a sudden, or finding reasons to withdraw. That quiet retreat is the fear of intimacy, and it shapes connection more than most people want to admit. The fear is not about touch or romance or affection. Those things are easy for many people. The real fear is about being emotionally seen, being known, being understood in a way you cannot control. Because once someone sees you fully, you cannot hide behind the version of yourself you carefully maintain. Real intimacy requires honesty, and honesty can feel like exposure. Humans crave connection, but they also fear the vulnerability that connection demands. This fear usually forms long before adult relationships enter the picture. Maybe you grew up in a place where opening up led to rejection or confusion. Maybe your feelings were dismissed or misunderstood. Maybe you learned that the people you depended on were inconsistent, so you built emotional independence to protect yourself. The mind remembers this. It forms a blueprint that says closeness equals risk, love equals unpredictability, vulnerability equals danger. So when someone genuinely cares, the brain does not see safety, it sees threat. It sees the possibility of being hurt the same ways you were before. And instead of letting intimacy in, you create distance to avoid the pain you have not healed from. This fear shows up in ways that seem harmless at first. You avoid talking about your deeper emotions because you do not want to feel exposed. You keep relationships at a surface level, even when you want more. You joke when conversations get too serious. You choose partners who are emotionally unavailable because it allows you to stay protected without admitting you are protecting yourself. Or you run toward intense attachment quickly, not because you feel secure, but because the speed distracts from the depth. The fear of intimacy also affects your sense of identity. When someone gets close enough, They might see habits or fears you have learned to hide even from yourself. Intimacy pushes you to confront your emotional truth. It forces you to acknowledge the parts of you that feel fragile, insecure, or unhealed, and facing those parts can feel harder than staying alone. There is also a psychological mechanism at play called protective distancing. When closeness triggers old emotional memories, the brain steps in to guard you. It tries to keep you safe by pushing people away before they reach the parts of you that feel sensitive. You might end things before they get serious. You might pick fights over small things. You might shut down emotionally the moment you feel cared for. It is not sabotage. It is self-preservation learned from experiences that once taught you connection was unsafe. But here is the deeper truth. The fear of intimacy is rarely about other people. It is about the stories you tell yourself about what will happen if someone sees you fully. You might believe they will lose interest, or judge you, or realize you are not as strong as you appear. You might believe your flaws are too heavy, your emotions too much, your needs too complicated. These beliefs are old wounds, not reality. The turning point comes when you stop confusing vulnerability with danger. Intimacy does not require perfection. It requires honesty. It requires letting yourself be seen in small doses, not all at once. It requires practicing openness even when your instinct is to retreat. It requires understanding that closeness does not guarantee pain, and distance does not guarantee safety. Fear loses power when you stop obeying it. You do not have to share everything. You do not have to rush. But you can let people in slowly, intentionally, at a pace that allows you to stay present instead of panicked. You can allow connection to feel unfamiliar without assuming it is unsafe. You can remind yourself that intimacy is not a trap. It is a bridge, and once you begin crossing that bridge, the fear starts to soften. You discover that being known does not break you. It steadies you. It strengthens you. It allows you to experience the kind of connection that was impossible while you were hiding behind emotional armor. And in that space, the fear of intimacy finally loses its grip, making room for the closeness you always wanted but never felt ready to receive. Fear of disappointment, hurting others. There is a certain tension that lives in people who care deeply. You feel it every time someone expects something from you. Every time a friend asks for support. Every time a family member depends on you. Every time someone looks at you with hope in their eyes. And instead of feeling empowered, you feel pressure. A pressure that whispers, do not let them down. Do not be the reason they hurt. Do not be the person who disappoints them. That quiet pressure becomes the fear of disappointing others. And it influences your life far more than you realize. This fear does not come from selfishness. It comes from compassion mixed with insecurity. It shows up in tiny decisions. You say yes when you want to say no. You take on more than you can handle. You apologize for things that are not your fault. You stay quiet to keep the peace. You carry emotional weight that is not yours, because somewhere inside you is a belief that hurting someone else is worse than hurting yourself. What makes this fear so heavy is that it usually starts from a place of love. Maybe you grew up trying to be the responsible one. Maybe the people around you reacted strongly when they were disappointed. Maybe you learned that your mistakes created conflict, or that your needs were an inconvenience. The mind absorbs these moments. It forms a rule that says your worth is tied to how well you meet the expectations of others. The moment you fail, even in a small way, you feel like you have harmed someone, even if they never said so. This fear shows up in the way you stretch yourself thin. You try to predict what others want before they even speak. You double-check everything you do to avoid misunderstandings. You over-explain. You over-promise. You over-function. And even when people tell you that you are doing enough, something inside refuses to believe it. You tell yourself that if you fall short, even once, someone will be hurt, and you will be the cause. There is also a psychological pattern at work here. The brain ties emotional safety to approval. When you fear disappointing someone, what you really fear is losing the connection you have with them. Disappointment feels like rejection waiting to happen. It feels like a doorway to conflict or distance. So you try to prevent it at all costs. But in doing so, you begin sacrificing your own boundaries, your own time, and your own emotional needs. This fear can also twist the way you see yourself. You start believing that you must earn love through effort. You believe that being dependable is the only way to stay valued. You fear that if you show weakness, or if you fail, the people you care about will see you differently. So you hide your struggles. You present yourself as stronger than you feel. You carry burdens quietly so that no one has to adjust for you. It becomes a silent performance where you protect everyone but yourself. The irony is that the fear of disappointing others often leads to self-betrayal. You abandon your own needs to protect someone else from discomfort. You agree to things that leave you overwhelmed. You stay in roles or relationships long after they stop feeling right because you do not want to cause pain. But avoiding disappointment does not create real harmony. It creates uneven connection where one person gives more than they receive. The turning point comes when you recognize that disappointment is a normal part of human relationships, not a disaster. You cannot prevent everyone from feeling hurt. You cannot carry every responsibility. You cannot be perfect for people who do not expect perfection from you. The fear convinces you that any discomfort you cause is unbearable, but discomfort is part of growth. It is part of honesty. It is part of real connection. Once you understand this, something shifts. You stop seeing yourself as someone who must protect others from every emotional ripple. You start allowing people to handle their own feelings. You begin setting boundaries without apologizing for them. You start saying no in a way that honors both you and the relationship. You learn that disappointing someone occasionally does not break the bond. It often strengthens it because it brings truth into the open. And when you let go of the belief that you must always be pleasing, you create space for relationships that are balanced, real, and rooted in mutual respect. The fear of disappointment loses its grip, and you finally learn that caring for others does not mean sacrificing yourself. It means showing up honestly, without carrying the weight of every possible reaction on your shoulders. Fear of conflict. There is a certain kind of tension that builds in your body long before an argument even starts. It is that tight feeling in your chest when someone disagrees with you. That heaviness in your stomach when you know a difficult conversation is coming. That silent pressure that tells you to keep the peace at any cost. You feel it before you speak, before you react, before you even decide what you want. That is the fear of conflict, and it shapes your behavior more than you might think. This fear is not about avoiding anger. It is about avoiding the possibility of emotional rupture. You worry that if you speak your truth, the relationship will shift. You worry that if you express your needs, someone will get upset. You worry that if you push back, even gently, the other person might pull away. So you swallow your reactions. You hold back your opinions. You pretend to be agreeable even when something inside you tightens, because you believe that conflict will break something you care about. This fear often begins long before adult relationships take shape. Many people grew up in environments where conflict meant danger or chaos. Maybe raising your voice led to consequences. Maybe disagreements turned into shouting matches that left emotional bruises. Maybe you watched people you loved drift apart because they never learned how to argue without hurting each other. The mind remembers all of this. It forms a rule that says conflict equals loss, conflict equals instability, conflict equals pain. So when tension appears, your instinct is not to communicate, it is to escape. You can see this fear in small moments. Someone makes a comment that bothers you, but you let it slide. A friend crosses a boundary, but you say nothing because confronting them feels too heavy. You go along with decisions you do not agree with because you do not want to create friction. You tell yourself it is not worth it. You convince yourself you are being mature, but often what you are really doing is abandoning your own voice to avoid a moment of discomfort. Psychologically, this fear comes from the belief that harmony must be protected at all costs. The brain treats conflict as a threat to belonging, and humans are wired to belong. Belonging feels like safety. Disagreement feels like danger. That is why even small confrontations feel unusually intense. Your nervous system reacts as if everything is at stake, even when the situation is minor. The fear of conflict can also warp your sense of responsibility. You begin carrying the weight of other people's reactions. You try to manage their emotions before they even feel them. You anticipate their disappointment. You rehearse conversations endlessly in your mind, trying to craft the perfect words that will cause zero discomfort. You think you are preventing problems, but you are actually creating distance between yourself and others by not showing up honestly. And the irony is that avoiding conflict rarely prevents it. It only delays it. The unspoken frustrations pile up quietly. The resentment grows slowly. The emotional distance widens without anyone naming it. Relationships do not break because of conflict. They break because of the conversations that never happened. Another layer of this fear is the belief that conflict must be destructive. Many people think that disagreement means disrespect, that differing opinions mean rejection, that expressing frustration means harming the other person. But conflict is simply two truths meeting in the same space. It becomes destructive only when it stays buried too long. The turning point comes when you recognize that conflict is not the opposite of connection. Avoiding conflict is. Healthy conflict is a form of honesty. It is a way of saying I value this enough to address it. It is a sign that you trust the relationship to handle truth. And truth is what creates authentic closeness. Learning to face conflict does not mean becoming aggressive. It does not mean arguing constantly. It means speaking from clarity instead of fear. It means trusting that your needs matter. It means understanding that discomfort is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that something real is happening. When you begin approaching conflict with honesty instead of avoidance, people start to know the real you. They learn how to meet you, how to understand you, how to respect you. You discover that disagreements can lead to deeper connection rather than distance. And little by little, the fear loses its grip. Because once you realize that conflict does not break relationships, but silence does, you stop running from it. You start stepping into it with courage. And that is when communication becomes real, boundaries become clear, and relationships finally have room to grow. Fear of missing out. FOMO. There is a certain rush that hits you when you think someone else is living a better moment than you. It is not even jealousy. It is more like a quiet panic that you are somehow falling behind in life while everyone else is out there experiencing something important. That tension in your chest, that restless scrawling, that urge to check your phone one more time. That is the fear of missing out, and it shapes your behavior in ways you barely notice. It does not matter how old you are or how stable your life seems. This fear whispers that somewhere out there is a version of your life you should be living. A better opportunity, a better night out, a better decision, a better path. It tells you that if you do not stay alert, if you do not stay plugged in, if you do not stay aware of every option, you might lose something that will never come back. This fear often begins with a simple human instinct. We are social creatures, wired to thrive in groups. Thousands of years ago, missing out on what the group was doing could actually be dangerous. You needed the tribe for survival. The brain still reacts that way today. If you sense the group is somewhere you are not, a primal part of you lights up and says, do not fall behind. Do not disconnect. Do not risk being left out. Even though the stakes today are emotional, not physical, the reaction feels just as urgent. The tricky part is that modern life pours gasoline on this instinct. Every notification, every highlight reel, every perfect moment shared online becomes a reminder that someone else seems to be doing more. You see people traveling, celebrating, achieving, connecting. And even if you know logically that these are edited moments, the emotional punch lands anyway. You start comparing your everyday life to someone else's curated peak, and the comparison always feels unfair. This fear shows up in your decision-making. You struggle to commit because part of you wonders if a better option is coming. You say yes to plans even when you are tired because you do not want to feel left behind. You keep your schedule open but still feel restless. You feel pulled in every direction but never fully satisfied. It is a constant scanning of possibilities, as if you are searching for the moment that proves you are in the right place at the right time. One of the most damaging effects of this fear is how it steals your presence. Even when you are enjoying something, your mind can drift to what you are not doing. You might be laughing with friends, but thinking about another event happening somewhere else. You might be resting at home, but feeling guilty for not being productive. You might be calm for a moment, but still feel like you need to check what everyone else is doing. FOMO is not just about wanting more. It is about being unable to fully experience what you already have. There is also a deeper layer beneath it. Many people who struggle with FOMO are not actually afraid of missing events. They are afraid of missing meaning. They worry that their life will not be memorable enough, adventurous enough, fulfilling enough. And instead of slowing down to create meaning, they chase possibilities hoping one of them will give them that feeling of significance. But meaning is never found by scattering your attention. It grows in the moments you commit to. The turning point comes when you realize that missing out is inevitable, and that is not a bad thing. You will always miss more than you experience, because life offers unlimited paths, and you only need the ones that align with who you are. Presence becomes powerful when you accept that you cannot have everything, but you can choose deeply. You can choose the people you want close. You can choose the moments you want to savor. You can choose the experiences that actually matter to you, not the ones that simply look exciting from a distance. When you start living like that, something shifts. You no longer chase every possibility. You no longer panic when you see others doing something different. You no longer feel pressure to be everywhere at once. Instead, you realize that the moments meant for you never pass you by, and when you stop trying to live every life at once, you finally get to live your own with clarity, presence, and peace. Fear of making the wrong choice. There is a particular kind of pressure that settles in your chest when you are standing in front of a decision that actually matters. It can be big, like choosing a career or ending a relationship, or it can be something small that somehow feels heavier than it should. You stare at the options, your mind looping through every possible outcome, every possible consequence, every chance that you might regret the choice you make. And in that moment, the fear of choosing wrong freezes you more than the choice itself. You would think making a decision is about logic, about weighing the pros and cons. But the truth is that the real battle happens in your imagination. You start picturing the future version of yourself who looks back and says, "Why did I do that?" You imagine opportunities slipping away forever. You imagine making one choice that shuts the door on every other path you could have taken. And that imaginary regret becomes so vivid that you start avoiding the decision altogether. This fear has roots much deeper than indecisiveness. It is tied to the belief that your worth is connected to how perfectly you navigate life. Many people learned early on that mistakes were punished, criticized, or used as proof that they were not careful enough. When you grow up with that pressure, every decision feels like a test you must pass. You are no longer choosing between options. You are choosing between success and failure in your mind. What makes this fear even stronger is the world we live in. You are constantly surrounded by endless options. There are countless careers, countless lifestyles, countless ways to spend your time, countless definitions of happiness. On top of that, you see everyone else posting their best decisions, their highlight moments, their big wins. And even if you know those snapshots are not the full picture, you still feel this invisible scoreboard where your choices must measure up. So when you face a decision, you do not just ask, "What do I want?" You ask, "What if I pick the wrong path? What if I waste time? What if I disappoint someone? What if I miss out on something better?" The fear turns every fork in the road into a life or death scenario, and that weight makes you hesitate, overthink, and sometimes do nothing at all. But here is the part we rarely talk about. The fear of choosing wrong often leads to more regret than the choice itself. When you delay decisions endlessly, you miss opportunities not because you made the wrong choice, but because you made no choice. When you refuse to take action, life chooses for you by default. And that passive regret is often the heaviest kind, because you know deep down that you never gave yourself a chance to find out what could have happened. There is a psychological mechanism behind this fear. Humans are wired to avoid loss more than they pursue gain. The idea of losing potential future outcomes feels more painful than the idea of choosing one path and committing to it. Your brain exaggerates the possible negative consequences because it wants to protect you. But protection becomes restriction when every choice feels like a threat. The turning point comes when you realize that no choice guarantees a perfect outcome. Even the best decisions come with uncertainty. Even the safest options carry risk, and even the wrong turns usually lead to growth, clarity, or new opportunities that you could never have predicted. Life is not a clean line that you either follow correctly or ruin forever. It is a series of chapters, each shaped by the choices you make, but also shaped by what you learn along the way. When you stop expecting decisions to be perfect, they become easier to make. You start choosing based on what aligns with you, not what looks safest. You stop trying to predict the entire future and start trusting yourself to handle whatever comes next. You stop treating every decision like a doorway that locks behind you and start seeing choices as steps forward rather than traps. The moment you accept that you cannot control every outcome, something shifts. You begin moving with more confidence. You stop waiting for absolute certainty that will never come. You listen to your own values instead of the noise around you. And gradually, the fear of choosing wrong loses its power because you finally understand that the only truly wrong choice is the one you were too afraid to make. Fear of being excluded. There is a quiet sting that hits you long before you even admit it out loud. It happens when you walk into a room and feel like conversations shrink the moment you arrive. It happens when you see people laughing together and your name is not part of the story. It happens when plans form around you instead of with you. That sinking feeling, that tightening in your chest, that silent question asking why was I left out? That is the fear of being excluded, and it shapes your behavior more than you realize. This fear is not just about being alone. It is about being unseen. Humans are wired for belonging. In ancient times, being excluded from your group meant danger. You needed the tribe for survival, for protection, for identity. Even today, your brain reacts to exclusion like a threat. When you sense that you are not part of something, your mind registers it as a loss of safety. That is why even small moments, like not being invited to something casual, hit harder than they logically should. It is not about the event. It is about what it represents. You see it in the way you check your phone to make sure you did not miss a message. You see it in the way you read between the lines of conversations, trying to figure out if you are being edged out. You see it in the way you sometimes force yourself into situations you do not even enjoy, just to avoid feeling like the only one not there. You tell yourself you are being dramatic, but emotionally, it feels like you are fighting to remain part of a world that might move on without you. For many people, this fear has roots buried deep in early experiences. Maybe you were the child picked last, or the one who had to try a little harder to fit in. Maybe friends shifted around you without warning, leaving you confused and searching for stability. Maybe you learned that inclusion was something you had to earn rather than something you were naturally given. These early lessons stick. The brain remembers them. It tells you stay alert, or you will be left behind again. As adults, the fear becomes more subtle, but just as powerful. You might become overly agreeable, shaping yourself to match the people around you, so you never feel out of place. You might silence your own opinions because you do not want to disrupt the harmony of the group. You might take on the role of the helpful one, or the funny one, or the reliable one, hoping that if you stay useful, you will stay included. But the painful truth is that the fear often makes you disconnect from yourself. Instead of asking, "What do I want?" you ask, "What will keep me part of this group?" Instead of asking, "Who do I feel good around?" you ask, "Who do I need to impress so I do not lose my place?" You start treating inclusion like a prize instead of a natural expression of belonging, and that mindset quietly drains your self-worth. There is a psychological loop that makes this fear grow stronger. When you anticipate exclusion, you start noticing signs that may not even be real. A slow reply feels personal. A forgotten invitation feels intentional. A shorter conversation feels like rejection. And once you assume you are on the outside, you behave more cautiously, more anxiously, more self-consciously. This can create distance where none existed, making the fear feel confirmed. But here is the shift that changes everything. Inclusion is not about fitting into every circle. It is about finding the spaces where you do not have to earn your place. You are not meant to be included everywhere. You are meant to be included somewhere that aligns with who you are, not the version of you that performs for acceptance. When you understand this, you stop chasing every social moment. You stop bending yourself for approval. You stop treating every group as a definition of your worth. Instead, you begin noticing who makes you feel welcomed without effort. You begin valuing the connections where you do not have to shrink or stretch yourself to be seen. And the fear of being excluded loses its intensity because you realize that exclusion is not a reflection of your value. It is simply a sign that you have not yet reached the circles that truly recognize you. When you stop fighting for places that do not fit, you finally make room for the ones that feel like home. Fear of being powerless. There is a moment in life when you realize how little control you actually have, and that realization hits harder than anything else. It might happen during an argument where your words do not matter, or in a situation where your efforts change nothing, or in a moment when someone else holds the authority to decide your fate. That sinking feeling in your stomach, that quiet panic rising in your chest, that urge to grab hold of something solid. That is the fear of being powerless, and it shapes your behavior far more than you admit. This fear does not just come from feeling weak. It comes from the terror of being at the mercy of something or someone you cannot influence. You want to know that your choices matter. You want to know that your voice carries weight. You want to know that you have some control over how your life unfolds. When that sense of control slips, even for a second, your mind scrambles to grab it back. You can see this fear in the way people try to manage everything around them. Some become planners who try to predict every outcome. Some become fixers who jump into action the moment anything feels uncertain. Some become perfectionists who believe that if they do everything flawlessly, nothing can hurt them. And some withdraw completely, not because they do not care, but because they fear getting involved in something they cannot steer. This fear usually begins early. Maybe you grew up in a home where your voice did not matter. Maybe decisions were made for you, not with you. Maybe you faced situations where you were helpless to protect yourself or the people you loved. The brain learns quickly from these experiences. It tells you do not let yourself be in that position again. Stay alert, stay guarded, stay in control, and even when your life changes, that voice stays alive. As adults, the fear becomes more complicated. You feel it when someone tries to influence your choices. You feel it when a relationship becomes unbalanced. You feel it when work decisions depend on things you cannot determine. You feel it when life throws unexpected changes your way. Instead of flowing with circumstances, you brace yourself, as if relaxing would make you vulnerable. The psychological mechanism behind this fear comes from something researchers call control theory. Humans feel safer when they believe they have influence over their environment. Even the illusion of control calms the mind. When that illusion breaks, stress rises fast. This is why people fear heights, tight spaces, unpredictable situations, and authoritative personalities. The common thread is the loss of agency. But here is where the fear becomes tricky. The more powerless you feel inside, the more you may try to control things outside. You try to control conversations so no one misunderstands you. You try to control outcomes so nothing surprises you. You try to control perceptions so no one sees you as weak. And the more control you chase, the more anxious you become, because deep down you know you can never fully hold everything together. This fear can also make you give away your power without realizing it. You might avoid speaking up because you assume it will not change anything. You might stay silent in situations where your voice actually matters. You might accept conditions you do not like because you believe resistance is pointless. Over time, this becomes a painful cycle. You feel powerless, so you do not act. You do not act, so you feel even more powerless. The shift begins when you redefine what power actually means. Power is not about controlling everything. Power is not about forcing outcomes. Real power is the ability to respond with intention instead of fear. It is the courage to speak even when your voice shakes. It is the clarity to set boundaries even if someone pushes back. It is the confidence to trust your judgment even when the future is uncertain. It is the willingness to take action even when you cannot guarantee the result. When you begin seeing power this way, something changes inside you. You stop chasing control as a way to feel safe. You stop giving up your influence just because a situation feels intimidating. You stop assuming that power belongs only to those who shout the loudest or take up the most space. You start noticing the quiet strength in your decisions, in your presence, in the moments where you choose courage over avoidance. And little by little, the fear of being powerless loses its grip, because you finally understand that power is not about dominating your world. It is about knowing that no matter what happens, you can meet it with your full self, not the version that hides in fear. Fear of being replaceable. There is a specific kind of ache that shows up when you start wondering whether you truly matter to the people around you. It slips in quietly, usually in moments when someone praises another person, or when you notice someone else doing what you do, maybe even doing it better. It appears when you feel taken for granted, or when you watch life move on around you, as if your presence is optional. That sinking question forms in the back of your mind, asking, what if I am replaceable? And even if you try to ignore it, the fear sits heavy, shaping the way you move through the world. This fear is not really about competition. It is about significance. You want to believe that your personality, your presence, your way of caring, your way of thinking makes a difference that cannot just be swapped out for someone else. But when you feel overlooked or undervalued, even for a moment, the fear hits like a quiet whisper, saying anyone could take your place. And that whisper is powerful enough to change how you behave. You might respond by trying harder to prove your worth. You might take on more responsibilities at work, hoping that being the reliable one will create a sense of irreplaceability. You might become overly available in relationships, doing more than you can sustain, trying to make yourself indispensable. Or you might shrink a little, becoming cautious and guarded, because the idea of being replaced hurts too much to face head-on. This fear often begins long before adult life. Maybe you grew up comparing yourself to siblings, classmates, or friends. Maybe you saw someone else get chosen while you were overlooked, and the moment imprinted itself deep in your mind. Maybe love in your early years felt inconsistent, So you learned that your value depended on how well you performed, how pleasant you were, how much you could offer. These early experiences do not fade. They teach your brain to look for signs that you are being edged out, even when the situation is neutral. As you get older, the world makes this fear louder. Everything around you emphasizes replaceability. People change jobs quickly. Friend groups shift. Relationships end and begin again. Social media constantly shows other people who seem more talented, more attractive, more interesting. You see endless examples of someone being swapped out for someone new, and your mind starts believing that it could happen to you at any moment. There is also a psychological layer at play. Humans are wired to seek uniqueness. You want to feel like your existence has a shape that no one else can fill. When that need feels threatened, the brain responds like it is facing a loss of identity. Feeling replaceable does not just hurt your pride. It challenges your sense of self. If someone else can step into your role without disruption, what does that say about your worth? The fear can push you into unhealthy patterns. You might overcompensate by doing everything for others, believing that effort equals value. You might compare yourself constantly, always measuring your place. You might stay in situations where you are not respected because leaving feels like admitting you were not truly needed. This fear can even make you tolerate mistreatment, because any attention feels better than the possibility of being forgotten. But here is the truth that changes everything. Being replaceable in a role is not the same as being replaceable as a person. Jobs can be filled by someone new. Tasks can be done by many people. But the way you think, the way you listen, the way you comfort, the way you love, the way you make someone feel safe or understood or inspired, that is not something another person can replicate. People can imitate your actions, but they cannot copy your essence. You are not meant to be irreplaceable everywhere. You are meant to be deeply valued in the places that fit you. When you stop chasing universal significance and start honoring your individuality, the fear loses its grip. You begin noticing the connections where you are appreciated not for what you provide, but for who you are. You realize that the right people do not need you to prove your worth. They already see it. And once that understanding settles in, you stop trying to secure your place through effort or perfection. You begin showing up as yourself, not as someone performing value, because the truth is simple. You were never replaceable in the places where you truly belonged. Fear of aging and irrelevance. There comes a moment when you catch your reflection and something feels different. Maybe it is a new line around your eyes, or the way your body responds a little slower, or the realization that the world around you seems to be moving faster than you are. It is a strange mix of awareness and discomfort, a quiet voice saying you are not as young as you used to be, and beneath that awareness sits a deeper fear, the fear of aging and becoming irrelevant. This fear is not just about getting older. It is about feeling like time is pulling you away from the center of life and placing you somewhere on the outer edges. You start noticing that younger people are stepping into roles you once dreamed of. Trends shift without you. Technology leaps forward, new voices rise. And you wonder if the world still has space for you, or if you are slowly fading into the background while everything else evolves without asking your permission. The fear often begins long before you reach a certain age. You grow up surrounded by a culture that worships youth. Everywhere you look, being young is linked with being valuable. Youth means potential, beauty, relevance, opportunity. aging is treated like a slow decline, as if every year you lose some invisible currency that everyone else can see. Even if you logically know aging is natural, the emotional weight is hard to ignore. You feel it when you compare yourself to younger versions of you. You feel it when you wonder if you have accomplished enough by now. You feel it when people around you move on faster than your own life seems to. And the fear grows because aging is not something you can control. You cannot reverse it. You cannot pause it. You cannot negotiate with time. So you start clinging to anything that makes you feel like you still matter. Some people try to outrun the fear by chasing achievements. They believe if they do enough, they will never be forgotten. Others try to preserve their youth by changing how they look, hoping that looking young will make them feel relevant again. And some withdraw quietly, feeling like their moment has passed, even when it has not. The fear convinces you that you must fight aging to maintain your worth. Psychologically, this fear is tied to identity. For years, you define yourself through roles that feel central. You might be the promising one, the young talent, the fresh voice, the attractive one, the energetic one, the one everyone expects something from. As time moves forward, those roles begin to shift. And when your identity relies on how others see you, every shift feels like a loss. The brain interprets it as a threat, not because aging is dangerous, but because change in identity feels like stepping into unknown territory without a map. There is also a deeper human instinct behind this fear. People want to leave a mark, even a small one. You want to know that your life mattered, that you contributed something meaningful, that someone will remember you. Aging confronts you with the reality that time is limited, and that thought is uncomfortable. It makes you question what you have built and whether it holds value beyond your younger years. But here is the turning point. Relevance is not something the world gives you. It is something you create. It is not tied to age. It is tied to engagement. It is tied to curiosity. It is tied to presence. The people who stay relevant are not the ones who cling to youth. They are the ones who keep participating, keep learning, keep evolving, keep showing up with depth that younger versions of themselves did not have. Aging does not take away your value. It expands it. You gain perspective you did not have before. You gain resilience. You gain emotional intelligence. You gain qualities that cannot exist without time. The world does not become less interested in you because you age. It becomes more interested in what you have experienced, what you understand, and what you can offer that no 20-year-old can replicate. When you stop fighting time and start walking with it, the fear loses its power. You realize that aging is not the enemy of relevance. Disengagement is, and the moment you choose to stay connected to your own growth, to your own curiosity, to your own evolving identity, you step into a version of relevance that youth alone could never give you. Because aging is not diminishing, it is deepening. And you are not becoming irrelevant. You are becoming someone the world needs in a different, richer way. Fear of losing one's identity. There is a strange moment in life when you look at yourself and feel a flicker of uncertainty about who you are becoming. It might happen after a major life change, or after years of bending to expectations, or after realizing you have drifted far from the person you used to be. It is subtle at first, a kind of emotional blur, a soft question rising in your mind, asking, "Am I still me?" And behind that question is one of the most unsettling fears a person can experience, the fear of losing their identity. This fear does not appear suddenly. It builds quietly as you move through chapters where responsibilities, relationships, or roles start taking priority over your inner self. You notice that you adjust your behavior to keep the peace, or you shape your personality to fit situations, or you silence parts of yourself because they do not seem welcome anymore. For a while, it feels normal, even necessary. But then one day, you feel a disconnect, like you stepped outside yourself and cannot quite find the way back. The fear grows because identity is not just about preferences or traits. It is your sense of self, your inner anchor. When that anchor feels loose, everything around you feels unstable. You begin to wonder if you are living from genuine choice or from habit. You question whether your dreams are still yours or if they were absorbed from the world around you. You question whether the opinions you express reflect your truth or simply what you think you should say. This fear is the mind trying to protect the most sacred part of you, the part that defines your existence. Many people feel this fear during major transitions, becoming a parent, starting a demanding job, leaving one chapter and entering another. Even falling in love can trigger it, because deep connection sometimes blurs the lines between where you end and the other person begins. You start adapting, compromising, adjusting. And while those things are natural, they can also make you feel like pieces of you are quietly slipping away. There is also a psychological pattern at work. The brain relies on a stable sense of identity to make decisions, form relationships, and navigate the world. When your identity feels threatened, even by growth, your brain reads it as danger. That is why the fear feels so intense. It is not about ego. It is about survival. Losing yourself feels like disappearing from your own life. This fear can push you into extremes. Some people cling tightly to old identities, refusing to change even when change would help them grow. Others become overly flexible, trying to please everyone so that they never face conflict. And some drift through life feeling like a spectator, watching themselves play roles that do not match their inner truth. The fear becomes a silent barrier between who you are and who you could become. But here is the part that people rarely realize. Identity is not supposed to stay fixed. You are not meant to be the same person at 15, 25, or 50. Identity is a living thing. It evolves as you learn, adapt, and experience life. The fear of losing yourself often comes from trying to hold on to a version of you that no longer fits the person you have become. Growth feels like loss when you do not recognize your own evolution. The turning point comes when you stop looking for your identity in rigid definitions and start looking for it in your values, your choices, and your inner voice. Identity is not the job you have or the role you play. It is the way you think, the way you love, the way you respond to life, the way you choose meaning. Those things do not disappear when circumstances change. They deepen. When you begin reconnecting with your own truth, even in small ways, the fear loosens its grip. You start making decisions that feel aligned. You start noticing what energizes you and what drains you. You start expressing opinions without filtering them for approval. You start trusting the part of you that has been quiet but never gone. And slowly, the blurry feeling fades, replaced by clarity. You do not lose your identity by changing. You lose it by ignoring yourself, and when you finally turn toward your inner voice, you realize that you were never disappearing. You were evolving into a version of yourself that is more real, more grounded, and more whole than any past identity you ever tried to hold on to. Fear of regret. There is a moment right before you make a decision when your mind suddenly jumps years into the future. You see yourself looking back, shaking your head, wishing you had chosen differently. That image hits you with more force than the decision itself. It is not the choice that scares you. It is the idea of living with the possibility that you might one day regret it. That is the fear of regret, and it can silently shape every direction your life takes. This fear is not about being indecisive. It is about protecting your future self from pain. You want to avoid the version of you who wakes up one day and whispers, "I should have done it differently." That thought is powerful enough to make you hesitate, overthink, or even walk away from opportunities you actually want. You imagine regret as a kind of emotional scar, something permanent and heavy, and you try to dodge it before it even exists. The fear grows stronger because regret is tied to memory, and memory is tied to identity. When you regret something deeply, it alters how you see yourself. It changes your story. It becomes a moment you revisit over and over, trying to rewrite what cannot be changed. Your mind knows this, so it tries to protect you by making you overly cautious, overly analytical, overly careful. You examine choices from every angle, as if the right combination of thinking can guarantee a perfect outcome. You feel this fear in the small decisions and the big ones. You feel it when choosing a partner, a career path, a city to live in. You feel it when saying yes to something you are not fully sure about. You feel it when saying no to something that might have changed your life. The what-ifs multiply, each one louder than the last. What if I choose wrong? What if this ruins everything? What if something better appears later? The fear convinces you that regret is waiting at the end of every uncertain path. This fear often grows from past experiences. Maybe you made a choice once that hurt you or someone you cared about. Maybe you walked away from something important and it haunted you for years. Maybe you missed a chance that never came back. The brain remembers emotional pain more clearly than anything else. So, when a new decision appears, your mind digs up old wounds and says, "Look what happened before. Do not let it happen again." But regret is not just about choices made. It is also about choices avoided. People often think avoiding action will protect them, but in reality, inaction creates its own version of regret. The regret of the paths never taken. The regret of the words never spoken. The regret of the risks never attempted. And that kind of regret tends to last the longest because it carries the weight of possibility rather than a defined mistake. There is a psychological mechanism behind all this. The brain struggles with ambiguity. It wants certainty even where it does not exist. So it imagines future regret as a threat, something to avoid at all costs. But the irony is that this fear can trap you in a life that feels safe yet unfulfilled. You end up choosing what is comfortable instead of what is meaningful, all in the name of avoiding pain that might never happen. The turning point comes when you realize that regret is not the enemy. It is a teacher. Regret is a signal that something mattered. It shows you where your desires truly live. It shows you where you acted out of fear instead of truth. It shows you the kind of life you want to move toward. People who live fully do not avoid regret. They transform it into clarity. When you stop trying to guarantee perfect outcomes, you make space for real living. You begin choosing based on alignment instead of fear. You stop asking what will keep me safe from regret and start asking what will make me feel alive. You realize that regret does not come from making imperfect choices. It comes from avoiding the choices that match your deepest values. And once you understand that, the fear loses its grip. Because the truth is simple. You cannot eliminate regret, but you can choose the kind of regret you are willing to live with. The regret of trying and learning will always be lighter than the regret of holding back and wondering forever. When you act from honesty, even if things do not go as planned, you can look your future self in the eye and say, "At least I lived." Fear of being manipulated. There is a specific kind of tension that forms in your chest when you start to wonder if someone is guiding your thoughts or nudging your choices in ways that do not feel entirely yours. It is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is just a subtle shift in your confidence, like a quiet voice saying something is off. That is the fear of being manipulated, and it can shape the way you trust, the way you connect, and even the way you protect your sense of reality. This fear usually comes from a simple human desire to stay in control of your own mind. You want your choices to be yours. You want your emotions to reflect your truth and not someone else's intentions. And the moment you suspect that someone is trying to twist your perception or steer your decisions, even in small ways, your entire system reacts. Your mind pulls back. Your body tightens. You begin scanning everything for hidden motives, trying to spot the angles you missed before. The fear becomes stronger if you have ever been manipulated in the past. Maybe someone used guilt to keep you close. Maybe they praised you when they needed something and criticized you when you gained strength. Maybe they made you feel responsible for their emotions or convinced you that your instincts were wrong. Even a single experience like that can make the fear linger for years. Your brain remembers the confusion and the loss of agency, and it vows never again. It becomes hyper-alert, always watching for patterns that resemble the old ones. Psychologists say that manipulation works by exploiting emotional blind spots. These are areas where you seek love, validation, belonging, or reassurance. When someone taps into those needs with the intention to control, the impact can be extremely deep. That is why the fear of manipulation is not simply paranoia. It is a protective response built from the understanding that the mind can be influenced without you noticing it right away. The fear can also show up in subtle daily interactions. You might hesitate to open up because you worry your vulnerability could be used against you. You might second-guess compliments, wondering if they are sincere or a setup for something else. You might analyze conversations long after they are over, trying to determine whether the other person had a hidden agenda. And even when someone is being honest, you can feel a pang of suspicion because the fear has trained you to assume the worst. But the real impact of this fear is not just interpersonal. It affects the relationship you have with yourself. When you fear being manipulated, you begin questioning your own judgments. You wonder if you interpreted something correctly. You wonder if you are too trusting or too guarded. You wonder if you are overreacting or underreacting. It becomes a cycle where you do not fully trust others, but you also do not fully trust yourself. And that internal uncertainty can be just as heavy as the fear itself. Yet there is a powerful truth behind this fear. The fact that you worry about being manipulated means you care about integrity. It means you value clarity. It means you want connections built on honesty rather than control. This fear does not make you weak. It shows that you are paying attention, and it shows that you want to protect your mental space from anyone who might try to invade it. The turning point comes when you shift from defensive fear to grounded awareness. Instead of assuming everyone has hidden motives, you start strengthening your own boundaries. You learn to recognize emotional pressure. You learn to notice when someone tries to make you doubt your reality. You learn to feel the difference between guidance and control, between influence and intrusion. You begin trusting your gut again, not blindly, but with clarity. When you rebuild trust in yourself, manipulation loses its power. You can listen without absorbing. You can care without losing your center. You can stay open without being naive. And you can walk through relationships with confidence instead of fear. Because in the end, the fear of being manipulated comes from one core truth. You want to remain the author of your own life. And once you reclaim that inner authority, no one can take it from you unless you hand it over. Fear of responsibility. There is a moment in life when you are handed an opportunity, a role, or a task that could genuinely move you forward. And instead of excitement, you feel a weight settle in your chest. It is not laziness. It is not lack of ambition. It is the fear of responsibility, and it runs deeper than most people admit. Responsibility means influence. It means impact. It means your choices suddenly matter in ways that cannot be undone. And that pressure can be terrifying. The fear often begins with a quiet thought. What if I cannot handle this? What if I mess something up? What if people depend on me and I fail them? Responsibility carries the possibility of being seen as capable, but it also carries the threat of being exposed as unprepared or not enough. So you hesitate, you delay, you shrink a little. Not because you do not want the role, but because the weight of it feels like it might crush you. There is also something strange about how responsibility shifts your sense of self. When you take on responsibility, you lose the ability to blame circumstances or other people. You become accountable for outcomes, even the imperfect ones. And accountability can feel like standing in the open without armor. You can no longer hide behind excuses or luck. You have to own your decisions, your actions, and the ripple effects they create. That level of ownership feels overwhelming for anyone who grew up believing mistakes must be avoided at all costs. Many people fear responsibility because they associate it with pressure from childhood. Maybe you were the one expected to hold everything together. Maybe you were punished harshly for mistakes. Maybe you learned early that responsibility meant sacrifice rather than growth. When you have been conditioned to see responsibility as danger rather than empowerment, you carry that mindset into adulthood. So when a new responsibility appears, your brain reacts not to the present moment, but to old memories of being overwhelmed. There is also a deeper psychological layer. Responsibility forces you to confront your potential. If you take on something meaningful and succeed, your life changes. New expectations rise. New challenges appear. The fear is not just about failing. It is also about what success might demand from you. You may worry that saying yes will pull you into a life with more pressure, more eyes watching, more people relying on you. And part of you wants to stay small because staying small feels safe. Responsibility also involves commitment, and commitment means letting go of the comfort of endless options. Once you take responsibility for something, you cannot float above it. You cannot dabble. You cannot disappear when it gets hard. Commitment narrows your focus, and that narrowing feels like losing freedom. So you keep your options open, even when that openness holds you back from building something real. Yet, despite all these fears, responsibility is one of the most powerful forces for personal growth. When you take responsibility for your life, something shifts inside you. You stop waiting for someone to save you. You stop giving your power away. You stop living reactively. Responsibility becomes a kind of mirror that shows you strengths you forgot you had. It teaches you resilience. It teaches you resourcefulness. It teaches you how capable you actually are when you stop running from your own potential. The turning point comes when you realize that responsibility is not a burden. It is a form of freedom. It means you have influence. It means you have choice. It means you have the ability to create outcomes instead of only reacting to them. And the moment you accept that, the fear begins to shrink. You start taking small responsibilities and noticing that they do not break you. They shape you. You learn that mistakes are part of the process, not proof that you should have avoided responsibility in the first place. When you stop seeing responsibility as a trap and start seeing it as a path, everything changes. You begin stepping into roles with confidence instead of fear. You begin trusting your ability to figure things out even when the path is unclear, and you realize that the real danger was never responsibility itself. The real danger was letting fear convince you that you were not capable of carrying anything meaningful. Responsibility does not take away your freedom. It teaches you how to use it. Fear of being taken advantage of. There comes a point in your life when you realize that being kind, patient, giving, or understanding has a hidden cost. Not because those qualities are wrong, but because the world is full of people who know exactly how to exploit them. And once you have been used even once, the fear of being taken advantage of settles deep inside you. It changes the way you trust. It changes the way you give. It changes the way you let people into your world. This fear often begins with a moment that blindsides you. Maybe you offered help and someone kept asking for more. Maybe you forgave someone and they took it as an invitation to cross your boundaries again. Maybe you gave someone time, effort, or love, and they treated it like an endless resource. And you look back thinking, how did I not see it? But the truth is you did see it, just not at first. Your kindness simply got there before your caution. Once that happens, a shift occurs. You start watching people more closely. You question their motives even when they seem genuine. You second-guess your own instincts because you worry you might misread someone again. This fear becomes a form of self-protection. You try to stay one step ahead so no one can drain you emotionally, financially, or mentally the way someone once did. Psychologists talk about something called exploitation sensitivity, a defense mechanism that activates when your boundaries have been violated. Your mind becomes hyper-aware of signs that someone might be using you. You notice tone changes, patterns of behavior, subtle requests disguised as favors. This sensitivity is not paranoia. It is your brain trying to prevent emotional harm from happening again. The hardest part of this fear is how it affects your identity. When you fear being taken advantage of, you may pull back from the parts of yourself that feel most natural. You might give less than you want to. You might avoid helping even when your heart nudges you to act. You might become guarded in moments that once felt effortless. It feels like you are protecting yourself, but it also feels like you are losing pieces of who you are. This fear also creates a tension between generosity and boundaries. You want to be open, but you also want to be safe. You want to contribute, but not be drained. You want to trust, but not blindly. And the moment someone asks for something, even something small, your mind scans for danger. Is this a genuine need or the start of a pattern? Is this kindness or manipulation? Is this connection or exploitation? You analyze everything because you know how easily a small yes can turn into a long chain of expectations. Some people become overgivers because they fear conflict, and that pattern makes them vulnerable to takers. When you do not want to upset anyone, when you avoid disappointing others, when you say yes to keep the peace, people who lack empathy spot that weakness immediately. They know how to push just enough to get what they want. And once you have lived through that dynamic, the fear of it happening again grows stronger than the desire to be open. But here is the important truth. The fear of being taken advantage of is not a sign that you should shut down. It is a sign that your boundaries were not respected in the past, and those boundaries now need reinforcement, not abandonment. The fear reminds you that your time and your energy have value. It reminds you that your compassion comes with limits. It reminds you that generosity without boundaries becomes self-harm. The turning point comes when you realize that caution and openness can coexist. You can say no without being harsh. You can help without sacrificing yourself. You can give from a place of choice rather than obligation. You can trust slowly instead of all at once. Boundaries do not make you cold. They make your kindness sustainable. You reclaim your power when you stop apologizing for protecting your space. You learn to recognize when giving feels natural and when it feels pressured. You spot people who respect your limits and those who test them, and you allow your heart to stay soft while your boundaries stay firm. The fear of being taken advantage of exists because you care. But when you learn to protect that caring nature without letting it be exploited, you stop living from fear and start living from strength. Fear of physical or emotional pain. There is a certain way the body tenses when you sense pain approaching. It does not matter if it is physical pain or emotional pain. The reaction is the same. Your chest tightens, your breath shortens, and your mind jumps ahead to imagine the worst version of what might happen. That instinct to brace yourself is ancient. It is wired into your system for survival. But in the modern world, the fear of pain often becomes something bigger than the pain itself. Most people are not just afraid of hurt. They are afraid of what hurt represents. Physical pain threatens your sense of safety. Emotional pain threatens your sense of self. And both kinds of pain have a way of making you feel exposed, vulnerable, and uncertain about how long the discomfort will last or how deeply it will shape you. So you do what humans naturally do. You begin avoiding anything that carries even the slightest hint of pain. This avoidance can seem small at first. You skip difficult conversations to avoid emotional tension. You stay away from risks because you do not want to experience failure. You hold back feelings because expressing them might lead to disappointment or conflict. You even avoid opportunities that could change your life because the process might involve struggle. Pain becomes the invisible wall that keeps you inside your comfort zone. The fear of physical pain is tied to your survival instinct. When the brain senses a threat, it sends signals that amplify danger in order to protect you. But emotional pain works differently. Emotional pain activates the same areas of the brain as physical pain. That means heartbreak, rejection, humiliation, and loss are interpreted by your mind as real wounds. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a broken heart and a broken bone. It only knows something hurts, so it pushes you to retreat. This is why the fear can feel overwhelming, even when the actual situation is not dangerous. Your mind remembers every moment of emotional or physical pain from your past. It stores the intensity, the shock, the helplessness. And when something reminds you of that old hurt, even faintly, your brain rushes to shield you. It does not care if the threat is real or imagined. It only cares about keeping you safe, even if that means keeping you small. But the problem is that avoiding pain often creates more pain. When you avoid emotional discomfort, you end up holding feelings that weigh you down. When you avoid physical challenges, your confidence slowly erodes. When you avoid risks, your life becomes narrower. You start living defensively instead of boldly. You start preparing for wounds that may never come. You start choosing safety over growth, even when that safety is only an illusion. There is a pattern psychologists call fear amplification. The more you avoid something that scares you, the bigger the fear becomes. The brain learns from repetition, so every time you dodge a painful possibility, your mind concludes that the danger must be unbearable. Over time, the fear grows larger than the pain ever would have been. Yet here is the truth people rarely acknowledge. Pain is temporary, but fear can last a lifetime if you do not challenge it. Pain, whether emotional or physical, is part of being alive. It teaches you what matters. It shows you your limits, and then shows you how those limits can stretch. Emotional pain teaches you resilience and depth. Physical pain teaches you caution and strength. Both kinds of pain are not just obstacles. They are teachers. The turning point comes when you stop seeing pain as the enemy and start seeing it as a signal. Pain tells you that you are trying, that you are living, that you are investing yourself fully. It reminds you that you have courage. When you stop running from discomfort, you realize that most of the suffering came from anticipation, not reality. You do not need to seek pain. You only need to stop treating it like a monster waiting behind every choice. When you face discomfort with honesty, something shifts. You become less fragile. You become more grounded. You learn that you can survive difficult emotions without collapsing. You learn that you can face physical challenges without losing yourself. And slowly, the fear loses its power. The fear of pain is really the fear of being overwhelmed. But once you experience your own strength, you understand that pain may touch you, but it does not define you. And from that moment on, fear has nothing left to hold on to. Fear of betrayal. There is a particular sting that does not feel like anything else. It is the moment you realize someone you trusted has crossed a line you never expected them to cross. That moment changes something inside you. It teaches you that even the closest people can break the promises you assumed were unspoken. And once you experience that kind of break, the fear of betrayal becomes one of the strongest fears your heart ever learns to carry. This fear begins with trust. Trust is not logical. Trust is emotional. It is a risk every time you offer it. When you let someone close, you allow them access to your history, your vulnerabilities, your hopes, and your insecurities. You give them the ability to comfort you, but also the ability to wound you. And that imbalance of power is exactly why betrayal cuts so deeply. It is not just a broken agreement. It is a violation of the emotional space you created with someone who was supposed to protect it. After a betrayal, something shifts inside you. You start observing people differently. You notice tone changes, distance, hesitation, or inconsistencies that you once dismissed. Your mind becomes cautious, scanning for signals before you even know you are doing it. It is a survival instinct born from emotional injury. You tell yourself you are being careful, but what you are really doing is trying to make sure you never feel that kind of fall again. The fear often shows up long before a new person has the chance to hurt you. You feel yourself pulling back just a little, even when someone seems genuine. You hesitate to fully open up because part of you is waiting for the moment things go wrong. You analyze loyalty before it is even tested. You question affection that feels too sincere. You doubt promises that sound too steady. This fear teaches you to protect yourself by staying one step removed. There is also a psychological reason this fear hits so hard. Humans are wired for connection. Relationships create safety. When betrayal happens, it threatens that sense of safety at the deepest level. The brain reacts as if you have been emotionally ambushed. It activates stress responses, heightens vigilance, and stores the memory as a warning. So even when you are in a completely different relationship or situation, the old fear still echoes, telling you to be careful, telling you to stay guarded, telling you not to trust too quickly. The hardest part of the fear of betrayal is how much it affects your relationship with yourself. After someone betrays you, you do not just question them. You question your own judgment. You wonder how you missed the signs. You wonder if you ignored your instincts. You wonder if you misread the entire relationship. That self-doubt can be even more damaging than the betrayal itself. It makes you think the problem was not that someone chose to hurt you. It makes you think you should have known better. Because of that, many people swing to extremes. Some close themselves off entirely, believing distance is the only safe place. Others become overly accommodating, trying to keep people close by avoiding conflict. Some test the loyalty of every new person, pushing them to prove themselves again and again. And while all of these reactions make sense emotionally, they can keep you trapped in the shadow of what someone else did to you. Yet there is a truth hidden beneath this fear. You are afraid of betrayal because you know how deeply you care. You know the value of connection. You know the weight of loyalty. Your fear is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of how much your heart invests when you choose to trust someone. The turning point comes when you understand that betrayal says everything about the person who broke your trust and almost nothing about the person who offered it. Trusting someone is not a flaw, it is a form of courage. It means you are willing to risk being known, to risk connection, to risk closeness. And courage is something betrayal cannot take from you unless you give it away. Healing from betrayal is not about becoming harder. It is about becoming wiser. You learn to set boundaries without closing your heart. You learn to recognize genuine loyalty because you no longer confuse it with charm. You learn to protect your peace without locking people out. Most importantly, you learn to trust yourself again, because once you trust your own judgment, the fear of betrayal loses the power to control your life. Betrayal may shape you, but it does not have to limit you. Once you reclaim your sense of self, trust becomes a choice again, not a threat. Fear of embarrassment. There is a moment everyone knows too well. That split second when you feel eyes on you, when your stomach flips, when your mind screams, "Do not mess this up." It could be something small like speaking up in a group, trying something new, or walking into a room where you feel out of place. Embarrassment is such a simple concept, yet the fear of it controls more decisions than people ever admit. This fear begins with the idea of exposure. Embarrassment feels like being emotionally naked in front of an audience you never agreed to perform for. It is the fear that someone will notice your flaws, your awkwardness, your humanity. And once that fear forms, it becomes a constant whisper in the back of your mind. It tells you to stay quiet, stay small, stay predictable, because anything outside your comfort zone might lead to a moment you cannot take back. Embarrassment hits so hard because it threatens your social belonging. Humans are wired to care about how they are perceived. Thousands of years ago, being rejected by your group meant losing safety, support, and survival. Even though the world has changed, your brain still reacts as if public judgment is a threat to your survival. That is why even minor slip-ups feel huge. Your heart races, your cheeks warm, your thoughts scatter. Your body acts like you are in danger, even when nothing is physically wrong. This fear grows stronger when your self-image is fragile. If you believe you must appear perfect, charming, or always in control, then embarrassment becomes your enemy. The idea of making a mistake feels unbearable, so you start avoiding any situation where you cannot guarantee the outcome. You avoid dancing because you think you look stiff. You avoid sharing ideas because someone might laugh. You avoid trying new things because you cannot handle being bad at something in front of others. Over time, this fear becomes a quiet barrier that limits your life. You convince yourself you are protecting your reputation, but really, you are protecting your ego from vulnerability, and that protection comes with a price. You say no to opportunities that might have changed you. You stay silent when you have something meaningful to say. You hold yourself back from experiences that could have brought joy, connection, or growth. There is also the memory factor. The brain stores moments of embarrassment with surprising intensity. It is why you can remember something awkward from years ago as if it just happened this morning. The brain exaggerates the emotional weight of embarrassment, so you will try to avoid repeating it, but that memory often becomes distorted. You think everyone noticed, when in reality, most people forgot instantly. You think the moment defined you, when really it was just one passing event. Psychologists describe embarrassment as a social signal. It shows others that you are aware of social norms and that you care about maintaining connections. Ironically, this means embarrassment actually helps relationships rather than harms them. When you blush, stumble, or admit a mistake, people see you as human, relatable, even trustworthy. Most of the scenarios we fear are moments that others simply move past. The turning point comes when you realize that embarrassment does not last. The moment ends. The emotion fades. The world keeps moving. What stays with you is not the embarrassment itself, but the story you tell yourself about what it meant. If you decide it meant you were incompetent, you shrink. If you decide it meant you were courageous enough to try, you grow. You start to break the fear when you stop treating embarrassment like a catastrophe. When you allow yourself to be imperfect. When you understand that everyone has stumbled, misspoken, tripped, or felt out of place. You do not need to avoid embarrassment. You only need to stop giving it the power to define you. When you let go of the fear, something surprising happens. You become freer. You take risks. You speak your truth. You try new things without calculating every possible mistake, and people begin to gravitate toward you, not because you are flawless, but because you are real. Embarrassment is not proof that you failed. It is proof that you showed up. And once you embrace that, the fear loses its grip, and your life expands in ways fear could never allow. Fear of failure to meet expectations. There is a specific kind of pressure that slips into your life long before you ever notice it happening. It comes from the expectations people place on you, the expectations you place on yourself, and the expectations you feel obligated to meet even when no one says them out loud. And when those expectations grow heavy, the fear of failing to meet them becomes a force that shapes your decisions more than any real obstacle ever could. This fear usually starts early. Maybe you were praised for being talented, responsible, or gifted. Maybe you were told you had potential and carried that label like a badge you had to earn every single day. Maybe you grew up trying to impress someone who never seemed fully satisfied. Over time, you began to believe that your worth was tied to your performance, and the pressure to keep meeting expectations became a quiet but constant companion. As you get older, the expectations multiply. Your family expects certain things from you. Your friends expect you to stay consistent. Your job expects results. Society expects you to follow a certain timeline, and you expect yourself to meet every one of those demands without slipping. It feels like you are walking on a tightrope with no room for a wrong step. One misstep, and everything could come crashing down. This fear is not just about disappointing others. It is also about the story you tell yourself about who you are. If you do not meet expectations, you worry that you will lose the identity you have built. You worry that people will look at you differently. You worry that you will no longer be seen as competent or strong or reliable. It is not the failure itself that scares you. It is what failure seems to say about you. The fear grows because expectations are often invisible. They are implied, subtle, or imagined. You do not even know where they truly came from, yet they dictate your choices. You push yourself harder than necessary. You take on responsibilities you do not want. You say yes to things that drain you. You try to maintain an image that looks impressive but feels exhausting. And beneath it all is the fear that if you fall short even once, everything you have built will crumble. Psychologists explain that this fear is rooted in a pattern called contingent self-worth. It means your sense of value depends on meeting certain standards. When you perform well, you feel good about yourself. When you struggle, your self-worth drops. This creates a cycle where you feel constantly monitored, even when no one is watching. You become your own harshest critic, punishing yourself for mistakes long after everyone else has forgotten them. The fear of failing to meet expectations can also make you over-prepare, overthink, and overwork. You try to stay ahead of disappointment by anticipating every possible flaw. You rewrite your plans dozens of times. You delay starting because the idea of not being perfect is unbearable. The fear turns your goals into burdens and your dreams into obligations. Instead of excitement, you feel dread. The worst part is how this fear can shrink your life. You avoid opportunities because you do not want to risk falling short. You hold back your creativity because it might not be good enough. You silence your ideas because you fear judgment. You settle for paths that feel safe instead of ones that feel meaningful. You live trapped inside a reputation you are afraid you cannot maintain. But there is a truth that helps unravel this fear. Expectations are not facts. They are assumptions. They shift. They change. And many of them are far harsher in your mind than they are in reality. The people who care about you do not expect perfection. They expect honesty. They expect effort. They expect growth. And the people who demand perfection are often projecting their own insecurities, not evaluating your worth. The turning point comes when you realize that your value is not something you earn by performing flawlessly. It is something you carry automatically. You begin to understand that falling short does not make you unworthy. It makes you human. You learn that meeting expectations is not as important as meeting yourself. Your peace, your truth, your authenticity, your limits, your needs, these matter far more than any external standard. When you stop living to satisfy invisible judges, the fear begins to loosen its grip. You start taking risks again. You start speaking without rehearsing. You start choosing what aligns with you instead of what looks impressive. You realize that you do not need to meet every expectation. You only need to meet your own sense of purpose. And once that truth settles in, failure is no longer a threat. It becomes a stepping stone, not a verdict. Expectations stop being chains, and your life finally becomes yours to shape. Fear of unmet potential lies, wasted life. There comes a point in life when you catch yourself wondering if you are becoming the person you were meant to be, not the person you told others you wanted to become, but the person you secretly hoped you could be. And in that quiet moment, a fear begins to rise. The fear that you are wasting your potential, the fear that your life is slipping by faster than your courage can keep up, the fear that you will look back one day and realize you never stepped into the version of yourself you always imagined. This fear is different from the fear of failure. Failure is about a single moment, a single attempt, a single result. The fear of wasted potential is deeper. It is about your whole life. It is about the gap between what you are doing and what you know you could be doing. It is the discomfort that sits in your chest whenever you think about all the dreams you pushed aside, all the talents you never developed, all the opportunities you let pass because you were scared, tired, or simply unsure. It often appears at unexpected times. Maybe you see someone your age achieve something incredible, and you feel a sting you do not admit out loud. Maybe you remember an old passion you left behind and suddenly feel the weight of how long it has been. Maybe you hit a routine that pays the bills but numbs your spirit, and you wonder how much longer you can pretend you are satisfied. This fear grows quietly, fed by the suspicion that you are capable of more. But time is moving faster than your bravery. Psychologists call this the ideal self gap. It is the distance between who you are and who you believe you could be at your best. When the gap grows too large, your mind begins to panic. It sends warning signals in the form of restlessness, envy, frustration, or a constant sense of urgency. Your brain is trying to keep you from drifting too far away from your deeper potential, but it expresses this warning as fear. The tricky part is that potential is not visible. It is imagined. It is a story your mind creates about a future version of you. And because it is imagined, it always feels unfinished. No matter what you do, it feels like you could do more. And that can turn into a heavy internal pressure. You start thinking that every choice you make is a test. Every year that passes feels like another line drawn across your life. Every path you did not take becomes a source of guilt. This fear can lead to two extremes. On one side, it can push you into overthinking. You feel like you need the perfect plan before you begin anything. You wait for the ideal timing, the ideal clarity, the ideal confidence. And while you wait, life keeps moving, which only makes the fear stronger. On the other side, it can make you freeze. You feel overwhelmed by the possibilities, scared that choosing one direction means abandoning countless others. So you choose nothing, hoping clarity will magically appear. But here is the truth that your fear hides from you. Potential is not something you are supposed to fulfill perfectly. It is something you grow into through action. It does not reveal itself fully before you begin. It unfolds as you move. It adjusts as you learn. It expands as you change. The fear tells you that one wrong turn will ruin everything, but life does not work that way. You discover your path by walking it, not by imagining it. The fear of wasted potential becomes weaker the moment you realize that your potential is not a fixed destiny. It is a direction. It is a call toward curiosity, growth, and courage. It is not demanding perfection. It is simply nudging you not to settle for a life that feels too small. When you start taking even small steps toward something that matters to you, the fear begins to shift. It does not disappear, but it transforms into motivation. You begin to see progress. You begin to feel alive again. You begin to trust yourself. And the life you once feared would be wasted becomes a life you are actively shaping, moment by moment, choice by choice, with a sense of purpose that fear can no longer silence.